Well, some interesting analysis out of a conference out east, taking a look at the first year or so since many Syrian refugees have come here to Canada, finding that, in fact, many are still having a hard time integrating, in particular when it comes to finding employment. And what they're suggesting with that is that the discrepancy is largely between the privately sponsored ones and the government-sponsored individuals. So I'm kind of curious, as we do take a look at this, what do you think is the reason for such an imbalance that might exist between those who are finding their footing quicker with the privately sponsored sort of route as opposed to the government route?
I think just from my own experience as a newcomer, even if I didn't come here as a refugee, I think the idea that you have a social network already around you when you arrive is really counts so much, because it's not just about the social supports that you have. Privately sponsored refugees already have a house and they've got all these basic things with them because that's provided by their sponsoring family or organization. But actually the networks that you have in terms of finding job, finding out information, where to get things, these are very important for a newcomer. And so I think that's the big difference between a government-sponsored refugee and a privately sponsored refugee, the social network that they actually have upon arrival,
as opposed to kind of
yet a formal service or program where you have to apply for eligibility, things like that.
And for me, like when I came about 9 years ago, like Suncor actually sponsored our family to come here because my husband got a job with them. And so we were temporary foreign workers. But the way we got, like the red carpet welcome that we got, none of the people who had PR or, like who came as landed immigrants got. So I was thinking, for us, it was such a blessing. Like, the HR head came to the airport and took us in his truck home, and they took us for the whole week. There was a lady who took us around, introduced us to the banks, the schools, the library. It was such a great experience for us. So we knew everything. After the end of 1 week, she was gone, and we were completely acclimatized to Fort McMurray. But, like for the people who come here as Syrian refugees with government aid, the problem is that that's all they get. There's nobody to take them around. There's no family. There is no social supports. They don't know whom to go to. They, of course, go to EMCN and other immigrant-serving organizations. But there's a limit to how much they can do under the government funding pots. So after that 1 year, they get very small amount of money to sustain their families. They don't have a place to stay, many of them. And they have barely enough to survive. So they do get some supports from the immigrant serving agencies, but that's all they have. And then their social networks slowly build up with similar people who don't have much and who don't know much. So then the problem is of awareness. Where do I go for this? Where do I go for that? They have a language problem. There's just so many barriers.
So is it a case, then I'll ask you, do you think it's a case of the federal government and provincial governments to that extent perhaps being more hands-on with the refugees coming over?
I think it's a two-way street. I think the government has to provide some opportunities and some resources in place to help them integrate and to help them become, more comfortable in their new home. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a willingness upon the people coming here to want to learn the language, to want to, go to school here, to want to learn new skills so they can, find a job. So I think it is a dual approach here. It's not one or the other. And, when the government or when there's a discourse about, why aren't these people more Canadian? I think that doesn't really serve it very well. I think that there has to be some sort of sympathy also along with a willingness on the other party to want to work together and to become Canadian.
Now, you brought up an interesting point when you came over here. Your husband hired for his credentials. That seems to be one of the components of those who are trying to do a better job at getting the Syrian refugees to work, because especially the government-sponsored ones having a hard time finding that footing on the employment front. Do you think more could be done perhaps to recognize the credentials that these individuals might be receiving in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I think that is a big step. Like IQAS could really help with some kind of leeway for these people to get it quicker than other people. There are lots of pharmacists, radiologists. I've met lots of really educated people from Syria, and I struggle to I just don't get it, because there is a need here. One of them actually told me that it was his uncle who found him a job. So, like, there's nobody else helping these people except their own relatives, like you said, Lucenia.
And you know, the recognition of foreign credentials has been the persistent problem of many immigrants and refugees. For many immigrants who've come here voluntarily, I mean, that's having finished a post-secondary degree as well as a work experience is one of the requirements. And for many refugees, I mean, many of them actually do have a post-secondary degree. So I think it is really a collective effort, both by the provincial government, the federal government, and the professional associations to work together and really find ways in terms of how they could to some extent revise their standards so that there are options for many immigrants with foreign qualification to become professionals
Well, in
too.
particular, as it pertains, I would imagine, to the industries where we're lacking in terms
Yes.
of employment.
Exactly.
But here's the question then. Do you think it's a feasible goal?
I think if it's made a priority, it could be a feasible goal. I think it's one of those things where the attention needs to be paid to it, and these types of issues need to be talked about, right? We need to have these studies take place to see what the gaps are, and once the gaps are identified, then we can take action. And so I think that's where the key is, to really look at these issues and really examine them.
So I seriously think that the Syrian refugees need to be heard. Is somebody listening to them what their needs are? Is somebody asking them, okay, what do you really want? You just can't keep on giving stuff to them without knowing what they want. It's not equal to what their needs are. So just ask them.
And there you go. Then hopefully this is the type of conversation, I think, that can help to encourage them, perhaps, to ask that question and to make sure their voices are heard. There you have it. That is the end of tonight's diversity panel. Thank you so much for coming in. Always a pleasure every Friday having you folks in. We're going to take a little bit of a break. Don't go too far. We've got more DT coming back at you, including, as we mentioned, Bridget Ryan with some of the finest Irish dancers in our city. Stay tuned.